also read a bunch of land use. We read all this stuff, so.
Good morning, everyone. I will now call to order the April 27, 2022 Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Land Use Hearing. I will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all. Thank you and good morning. We are holding this meeting in person and virtually. If you joined us via Zoom for this meeting and are interested in providing public comment, we will prompt you regarding how to do that when the time is right. The Zoom link and instruction to participate via Zoom are located at www.clackamas.us/meetingsbcc/land use. That is a mouthful. Today, we will consider ZDO-282, a proposed legislative text amendment to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning and Development Ordinance related to housing. General public will be taken at the usual allotted time. As always, the public is welcome to sign up to testify. For those attending in person, please fill out a blue card at that table and put it in the basket, and Tony will pick it up, and you will be called on to testify at the appropriate time. I would like to remind all participants, including staff, all elected officials, and members of the public that Robert's Rules of Order will be enforced in this meeting. We welcome your opinions and look forward to your polite participation. Assisting us in the hearing today is our clerk, Tony Mayernick, right here, planners Martha Fritzie and Joy Fields, and County Counsel Nate Boderman. The hearing on ZDO-282 will proceed as follows. 1, we will first hear a presentation from Principal Planner Martha Fritzie and Senior Planner Joy Fields. Next, I will open up the public hearing for public testimony, beginning with public officials who will have 5 minutes each. Then representatives from recognized community planning organizations and agencies will have 3 minutes each. Finally, others wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. We are now open for the staff presentation. Who wants to go first? Martha Fritzie.
I will. I think we have a PowerPoint coming up here momentarily. There we go. Excellent. So, good morning, Commissioners. We are here, as you mentioned, for a land use hearing for ZDO 282, also called Phase 2 of our Land Use Housing Strategies project. The primary purpose of this proposal, the proposal is a legislative text amendment to the Zoning and Development Ordinance, or ZDO, as it will be called throughout this presentation, and the comprehensive plan. It is a pretty extensive set of actual amendments. It was all included in Packet B in your board hearing packet. We are touching 21 sections of our zoning and development ordinance and 3 chapters and an appendix in our comprehensive plan. The 21 chapters include a new chapter specifically for some standards around middle housing. It includes repealing one of the chapters, and then a whole lot of other amendments that are needed to implement ZDO 282 and House Bill 2001 for middle housing. So the primary purpose of these code amendments is to implement House Bill 2001. As you all are probably aware, this is legislation out of the 2019 Oregon legislature that mandates certain middle housing types, which we will spend a little time talking about, mandates certain middle housing types be allowed in certain urban areas. Also included in ZDO 282 is some code amendments to implement Senate Bill 458, which came out of the 2021 legislature, that Further allows this middle housing, land developed with this middle housing to be divided into what's called middle housing land divisions, and so we've included the code amendments to implement that as well. There are a few other housing-related amendments included in this package. They are largely to help facilitate permitting, reduce barriers to development of middle housing, and just generally housing in the urban areas, and also to implement some other legislation that came out of this past session this year. So just right up front, both staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval of all of the amendments found in ZDO 282 as are identified in, like I said, Packet B in the board's packet. The Planning Commission voted 6-2 in favor of this recommendation, and I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So just very basically some background, what is middle housing? Well, House Bill 2001 defines middle housing as duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or also called quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. And by June 30th of this year, the county and a number of other cities in the state of Oregon must either adopt zoning standards of their own to be consistent with the state's regulations around middle housing, or have to use the state's middle housing model code. Those are the two options. So the state passed this middle housing bill largely in an effort to provide more housing variety, more housing choice, that is, by its nature of being smaller and a little bit more dense, more affordable in some of the urban single-family residential neighborhoods. And I think it's important to keep in mind this idea of affordability. We're not talking about low-income, sort of capital A affordability subsidized housing. We are talking about housing that's naturally at a lower price point, either for rent or for sale, lower than the detached single-family home that typically is found in some of these areas. And so another thing to keep in mind is that, yes, this is indeed a mandate from the state. We have to do this. We have to either adopt the zoning standards, our own zoning standards, or we have to implement the model code. And so we've had some conversations both with the public and with the Planning Commission and with you in the past about the implications of implementing the model code. And so I think that we are all seem to be in agreement that that would not be the best course for the county. Certain things in the model code would have to be implemented, like a much lower to no parking requirements for certain middle housing types. There would be no minimum lot sizes for certain middle housing types. We may have to allow certain middle housing types to be built closer to property lines in single-family dwellings. And these are all things that we've heard are not what the county would desire for their own middle housing codes, and so we have moved forward with drafting and developing our own zoning codes. And then one other thing to keep in mind as we're thinking through this, this is a state mandate, but at the end of the day, none of these requirements are inconsistent with the board's policies on housing, including those under Performance Clackamas, where the goal is to provide places to create 1,500 new housing units, 700, I believe, of which are the responsibility of DTD. And so this definitely works toward that creation. And then it's also in line with the housing values that were recently adopted by the board earlier this month, particularly for providing more options and opportunities in various areas across the county, and then particularly with regard to the extensive public outreach that was done for this project, which Joy is going to talk to you a little about in just a moment. So just a visual as we're thinking through this, middle housing, duplexes, or plexes, I will call them plexes a lot. We're talking about duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. That means either 2, 3, or 4 dwelling units that are connected to each other that are built on one lot. They could be side by side, like some of these examples. They could be internal with a door and 4 units inside, like up on the right. I guess I can't point with this. It could be an internal conversion of an existing single-family home. It could be new construction. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about plexes. These are not high-rise apartments by any means. They could be as tall, or they could be built as tall as a single-family dwelling in neighborhood, but not taller. The other types of middle housing we're talking about are, there we go, townhouses, which we all are, I think, pretty familiar with. We call them row houses frequently. It's houses that are attached to each other side by side. Each one is on its own lot. And then this new housing type, at least in our zoning code, called a cottage cluster, which are smaller, detached homes surrounding some common area. There is a requirement that it include a common courtyard. And there are some other requirements as well, but that's what these pictures are on the right-hand side. And when we are talking about the urban single-family neighborhoods or unincorporated urban area where we have to allow this, we're specifically talking about those areas identified in yellow up on this map. It's the zoning districts that are listed to the left. I think it's important to keep in mind two things. One, I know you've all seen this map before. All of the areas in yellow are in the zoning districts that have to allow for middle housing. It certainly does not mean that every single lot in these yellow zones would qualify for all these various middle housing types. The lots may be developed, and it may be that only one additional unit could be put on it. It may be that the lot is too small for anything but a duplex and a single-family home. And so there's lots of standards that have to be met. But these are the areas in which House Bill 2001 says we have to allow. It does not mean that we have to sign off on every permit that comes across if it doesn't meet the standards. The other thing to keep in mind is the cities that are grayed out up there also are required to follow the exact same rules that we are following. They have to implement House Bill 2001. They have to follow the same statutes and Oregon administrative rules that are very prescriptive about what you can and cannot do in your zoning codes and how you have to implement House Bill 2001. And so before I get into some of the details about the changes to the ZDO and the comp plan, I'm going to hand this off briefly to Joy, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the public outreach that we did that really fed into a lot of our zoning code changes is some of the choices that we made where we had choice when it came to writing these codes.
Hello, thank you, Martha. Our outreach related to House Bill 2001 started in 2021, and it started with broad implications of House Bill 2001. We provided presentations to our community planning organizations, and we had a survey that went out to Clackamas County residents to get an idea of how much they knew about House Bill 2001 and where their feelings were as far as the directions that Clackamas County should go. Our second phase of outreach continued this winter. And so we were able to deepen the understanding that we had about what the community wanted through additional surveys, as well as continued effort to reach the historically marginalized communities of Clackamas County. And they were reached using funding through a grant that was authorized by the board. We applied for and accepted a grant from the Department of Land, Conservation, and Development to really engage with multicultural communities throughout Clackamas County. And we used the services of consultants. In 2021, we used their services to create a uniform look for the outreach, including a logo, as well as handouts and information. We also began discussion groups where we met with communities and had a liaison there with us to provide presentations in the common language of the participants. That meant that presentations about House Bill 2001 that were generated by staff were given by someone in Russian, in Chinese, in Vietnamese, and in Spanish. The handouts that were provided both in 2021 as well as those that were updated this winter were also translated into these 5 languages. For the Chinese, that actually included both simplified as well as traditional Chinese, so that the information about House Bill 2001 would be accessible to more audiences and reach them where they were. And that was facilitated by the community engagement liaisons, actually letting their communities know when the surveys were open and encouraging participation from these multicultural groups. That led to us receiving responses to our surveys in all 5 languages, so that we really heard from a diverse swath of Clackamas County residents. We also were able to use the consultants to translate an FAQ sheet. So in 2021, there was a broad implication of House Bill 2001, but as we started drafting code changes, we wanted to hear from the community on the areas where the county has flexibility and what direction the county should go. And so the FAQ sheets, as well as the discussion groups, really informed staff and helped us to have a direction that the community supported. And as with all state mandates, there was mixed response in our discussion groups about how much flexibility the county should provide for middle housing and how much we should just stick with the bare minimum of following what the state required. And so through this outreach, we also had a virtual question and answer session that was requested by the Board of County Commissioners that was advertised to all property owners who had property in the urban unincorporated area of Clackamas County that would be impacted by House Bill 2001. And 42 attendees got specific information on how House Bill 2001 would impact their specific property and their specific neighborhood. This outreach, as Martha mentioned, really does support your values on housing and shelter that you all adopted in April by having it accessible to historically marginalized communities. The online aspect, the virtual aspect, was one of the things that participants said helped them to participate, as well as being invited. They appreciated being invited to participate, and that was something that they had not experienced before, and they really appreciated that. And so working with the consultants through these grants really allowed us to do additional outreach that staff may not have capacity to do without the grant funding and the work of the consultants. So it was a very in-depth outreach for these code amendments.
Thank you, Joy. And Exhibit 11 in your packet is the final report from the consultants about the outreach, and it does contain some specific quotes from the community members that were involved. And it's a very good report. I recommend reading it if you get the chance. And it also includes what we asked some of the participants. It includes recommendations for how to continue to do this type of outreach in the future. For other projects. So we try to make it not exactly specific to this one, so we can learn. So I'm going to move on to sort of the nitty-gritty boring parts now.
May I intervene? Commissioners, do any of you have, because this is a lot of information, do commissioners have any questions or comments up to this point on this? Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, I just, as I'm perusing, reviewing some of this, the home builders refer to something on page 2 called a FILO. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
I will get to actually on this slide.
Okay.
And then I'm happy to clarify if you still have questions.
Any other comments from commissioners up to this point?
I'll jump in just a little bit on public outreach. It sounds like you've done something unique here, and that's great. So I appreciate how much outreach has been done. And I've been thinking about this for weeks now, about where we are today and what we're up against with the state legislature playing in the land use field today. In my 25 years of going to community meetings and being a member of my local community planning organization and listening and watching the developments go through their, as an advisory function, I realize that people that are new to this don't necessarily absorb the entire picture and understand the consequences. That's a word you'll probably hear a lot from me today, are the consequences of things that we do or don't do, or oversights. And this is more commentary, I have been, people after a while realize, well, wait a minute, didn't we do, what was a FILO thing, for example? We did that thinking that sidewalks would be built with those areas in which sidewalks weren't implemented, those revenues. And we've done a little bit of that. But the one that I think is probably the most compelling is how what we're doing here today conflicts to quite a degree, in my opinion, with the 19 state planning goals and the balance between trees, the tree canopy, which has always been a big deal for a lot of folks, and then what we're doing here with the legislature saying we're just basically just going to plaster the entire tree canopy, let's say in a community that's got a tree canopy, with perhaps dwelling units. I mean, that's really the goal. So that's in conflict with some of the state planning goals, if you will. Again, consequences, I appreciate that outreach, but it's just, unless someone follows it for a number of years, do you understand that some of the things that are assumed to happen or the consequences thereof aren't really realized by the public until they really spend a lot of time watching what's happened. And we are where we are today. You'll just look around and where we are, and I don't think that we're necessarily happy with where we've become or where we are. I don't think this is going to fix it, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Martha Fritzie, would you please continue?
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about provide a little bit more detail about the specific code amendments that are included in this package. And I think first and foremost, these amendments were developed through the feedback from the public outreach, but also in compliance with the rules and regulations around middle housing that came out of the state, out of House Bill 2001, and out of the subsequent rulemaking that happened afterward. And it was pretty prescriptive. There were a lot of things that we did not have choices on, and so we tried to cull through that in a lot of detail and figure out where we had some choices and ask and decide what choices we could make. But all of the code amendments were developed using all of those various pieces. And so first and foremost, one thing we heard in a lot of our public outreach was concern that individual properties are being rezoned, and they are not. What this is doing is simply allowing, in those zones that were identified in the yellow on that map, it's allowing different types of development to happen than can right now. So right now, in those zones, somebody could build a single-family home and an accessory dwelling unit. And this is that's not going to be taken away. Somebody could still build a single-family home and an accessory dwelling unit. The difference is that now they could potentially build a duplex or these other middle housing types. And so a lot of the changes that are in the specific code amendments are clarifying defining these different middle housing types, because we didn't even have definitions for some of them, and clarifying where they're allowed and what development standards would apply. It includes, like I mentioned, an entirely new section with all siting and design standards that are unique to triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. You'll notice that duplexes are not in there. Per House Bill 2001 and the subsequent rules, duplexes have to be treated exactly the same as single family. There really aren't any special siting or design standards that you are allowed to have. That includes things like, lot coverage and setbacks and heights, things like that. So with respect to the other middle housing types, we are allowed to have some special siting and design standards, including minimum lot sizes, and we've talked extensively about this with the public and with you in the past. The proposal does include a minimum lot size for triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters, as allowed under the rules for House Bill 2001. The minimum lot size is not extraordinarily large, admittedly. It's 5,000 square feet for a triplex and 7,000 square feet for a quadplex or a cottage cluster, and that is, under the rules, the largest minimum lot size that we can require, and so the proposal does that. Townhouses are regulated a little bit differently. It's based on 3 or 4 times the density that you would be able to have for a single-family home, which is in alignment with the triplex, quadplex idea. Other standards in there specific to those types of middle housing include entry orientation, driveways, in terms of widths and how the driveways and parking can be laid out with the intent of not allowing the entire front of the property to be paved over and look like a parking lot, essentially. There are a lot of specific standards around cottage clusters. This is a new development type. There's a requirement for courtyard. It has to be a certain size. A certain number of dwellings need to be oriented around that courtyard. There's also some standards for how the parking related to a cottage cluster can be configured, and some landscaping requirements even for the parking associated with that. There's a lot in there, and I can certainly answer specific questions if you have any about the specific standards. So the amendments also identify sidewalk requirements, and this ties into the FILO conversation. It's the FILO, or FILO stands for fee in lieu of. Okay. And so the county currently has a FILO program, which, well, let me take a step back. Currently, if you came in and developed a single-family dwelling, a duplex, triplex, any of these things, our code requires that a curb and sidewalk be built if one doesn't exist in front of that property. However, in certain locations in the urban area, in certain circumstances, if the development includes 3 or fewer lots or 3 or fewer dwelling units, it may be eligible to pay into this FILO program, so they pay a fee in lieu of building the sidewalk, and then that money goes into a fund that funds the building of sidewalks in other locations in the urban area, maybe more heavily trafficked locations typically associated with the school or some other use like that. Currently, if you are developing 4 or more lots or dwellings, you don't have that option to pay into the FILO. The sidewalks have to be constructed. This proposal does not change anything about the FILO. So the cutoff is between 3 and 4. So for middle housing, that means if a triplex or townhouse, 3 townhouses, a duplex or anything with fewer dwellings is built, it may be eligible for the FILO. 4 or more will have to build the sidewalks. Again, that's exactly what our code says now, but that's the implication for the middle housing. And so we're not proposing a change in the FILO program right now. In addition, parking, of course, is always a big conversation with the public, with the Planning Commission, with the board. The rules under House Bill 2001 allow, there's some nuances, but what it means for our code is we can require 1 off-street parking space per dwelling. That is the most that we can require. We could allow a developer to build more, but we cannot require more. And so that is what is proposed in ZDO 282. There was an option in the rules to allow for on-street parking spaces to count toward that parking ratio. And we've heard pretty loud and clear through our public outreach, to the various commissions that was not an option that we wanted to proceed with in the county, and so it is not on there. The proposal is 1 off-street parking space per dwelling. So if somebody wanted to come in and build a 4-plex, 4 parking spaces off-street. And there are regulations sort of about how that needs to be configured. So that is the bulk of the middle housing standards. Obviously, there's a lot more nuance included in all of the specific code sections. So I mentioned the proposal is doing a few other things as well, making a few other housing-related amendments. One of them is a proposal to remove the 3,000 square foot minimum lot size for residential development. Currently in our code, if you have an existing lot that was created legally a long time ago that happens to be smaller than 3,000 square feet, you can't build a residence on it, even if you could meet all the development standards. We don't really, honestly, as staff, know why that was originally put on there. There doesn't seem to be a good reason for it. Furthermore, there was legislation, I believe it was out of into 2019 legislature that arguably may or may not apply to the urban unincorporated area that would not allow that sort of prohibition. And then the House Bill 2001 rules require us to allow a duplex on any lot that's zoned for single family. And so it doesn't really make sense anymore to have that minimum lot size. If we have to allow duplex, it doesn't make sense to not allow a single family. So the proposal is just to remove that. And again, this isn't changing anyone's ability to divide their property smaller necessarily. It's just on existing lots that happen to be smaller than that. Their proposal also would amend lot coverage in some zoning districts. And this is largely to streamline permitting process. It would mean that in some zoning districts in the R7, in some areas in the R7 to R30 zoning districts, the lot coverage would change from 40% to 50%. That's in line with the lot coverage allowed in a lot of the other urban low-density residential districts, and it is in line with some of the exceptions that we allow. And so rather than having it so complicated, we are proposing to streamline it and just have it 50% across the board. The proposal also would allow these middle housing land divisions. We've woven that into our code amendments, and again, that came out of the 2021 legislature. If somebody is building middle housing that complies with House Bill 2001 rules, we now have to allow that land to be divided. And then finally, the last big thing that the code amendments are doing is repealing Zdos Section 824, which includes some development standards and design standards that are unique for manufactured homes. And these are manufactured homes that are placed on individual lots, not in parks necessarily. This year's legislature, I don't know the name of the House bill off the top of my head, but there was legislation passed that prohibits jurisdictions from having these unique standards for manufactured homes that, standards that are different than single family. They have to be treated the same. So our proposal is to repeal that now to comply with at least a piece of that legislation, just as easier to do it all at once. And then finally, also included in your packet are some proposed amendments to 3 chapters of our comprehensive plan. The most extensive changes are to Chapter 6, our housing chapter. It includes a pretty substantial rewrite of the background and issues section. That chapter was so outdated, it actually contained population projections that ended in 2010. And we have certainly different circumstances around housing than we did when this was originally written back in 1980 something or other, and we've also updated it to reflect things that were found out through the housing needs analysis that was completed several years ago, and updated some goals and policies really with an eye more toward equity, inclusion, and diversity. And so there are some pretty significant changes in Chapter 6, but it was really needed. It was really out of date. And then the changes to Chapters 4 and 10 are really just around middle housing and making sure that there aren't any inconsistencies or barriers to the implementation of House Bill 2001. So because this is a legislative text amendment, we do need to comply with a whole slew of regulations, and I won't get into a lot of detail about it. There are some draft findings that are included in the Planning Commission staff report, which I think is the 3rd document in Packet A in your packet. It includes discussion of compliance with statewide planning goals, and then the specific ORSs and the Oregon Revised Statutes and Oregon Administrative Rules related to middle housing. As I mentioned, the statutes are really the language on House Bill 2001 is located, but there was about a 1.5-year long rulemaking process that happened to create some detailed rules about how jurisdictions are to implement House Bill 2001, and those are found in the Oregon Revised Statute, the Oregon Administrative Rules, the OARs, and that is really what we have followed as we've developed these various code amendments. And then, of course, because we are in Metro, we have to comply with the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, and then, of course, the county's plan and the Zoning and Development Ordinance, which is largely procedural for this case. After all was analyzed, staff has found that this proposal is compliant with all of the applicable regulations, and I'll just leave it at that. You can read more detail about it in that Planning Commission staff report if you want. And then finally, a few significant issues that came up through this process, and particularly at the Planning Commission hearing, was this idea generally about, concerns about middle housing in urban neighborhoods, and we do understand that. I know that there's both the Planning Commission and the public still do have some concerns, as do you all probably. I think it is important to keep in mind, though, that this is a state mandate. There are implications to not adopting our own codes and just having the model code imposed on us, as it were. And also, it's important to keep in mind that really at the end of the day, these changes are consistent with the board's, housing goals. Another issue that came up through the public outreach, and I tried to discuss it a little bit in your staff summary in the board packet, is this idea of sufficient urban services. And I'm going to defer a little bit to Nate on this if I muddle it all up. So basically, what House Bill 2001 said is that unincorporated areas that do not have sufficient urban services do not have to comply with House Bill 2001. There was no definition of sufficient urban services in that. And so through the rulemaking, the administrative rules defined sufficient urban services. It's a pretty low bar, admittedly, based on the definition of what sufficient urban services means. And the rules also were specified that as development comes in, it needs to be able to be served by urban services. And so based on the definition that was developed in the rules, there aren't any areas located in the yellow on that map that we looked at earlier. There aren't any areas in there that would not meet the definition of having sufficient urban services. And furthermore, through the development review process, access to public sewer, water, adequate storm drainage, access for emergency services is reviewed through the building permit process. And so staff feels that they're really, that this proposal does need to apply to all of those yellow areas, and that based on the definitions in the administrative rules, we have to apply it. Our two choices are those that I talked about before. One thing to mention that I didn't mention earlier is that, when we start talking about changes in neighborhoods and middle housing, the rate of development is really expected to be quite low. And early on in the process, about 2 years ago, there was this window of opportunity in which a jurisdiction could apply for an extension based on certain urban services not being able to accommodate middle housing. And in other words, not being able to, they could accommodate a single family dwelling, but not this inclusion of middle housing. And that analysis, based on some work that had been done on middle housing, the assumption was that the infill rate of development would be about 1% to 3%. And so it's really expected to be a very slow or gentle infill process with the middle housing. And so we reached out to our urban service providers at that point in time and asked them if there were any areas of concern that might warrant an extension, and we did not. Those that we heard back from, we did not indicate there were any areas of concern, and so therefore we did not apply for an extension, and we've sort of plowed ahead with this amendment package. So that is my muddle through of the sufficient urban services conversation. Nate may have some more to say about that as we get through this, and then I'm almost done. I know I talk a lot, I'm sorry. This is it. So the last thing that the Planning Commission asked us was to develop some metrics to track the progress for middle housing. We have committed to the Planning Commission that we will do that. That's not part of this package. It's not a ZDO amendment, but this is sort of part of our tracking, so we understand exactly what's happening in the future. And so finally, on March 28th, the Planning Commission did hold a public hearing. I mentioned they voted to recommend approval, 6-2. There were 5 people that attended that hearing. It was virtual. Only one person testified. That testimony was really related to this idea of sufficient urban services. There was not any testimony about any other portions of the proposal. I think there was a general understanding among most of the planning commissioners that the proposed amendments are a better alternative for the county than the state's model code. There were some commissioners that really were very gung-ho about middle housing, and some that were not, and so I will wrap it up.
Thank you very much,
You're
Martha
welcome.
Fritzie. Nate Boderman, do you have any comments on what was said so far?
No, I think Martha summarized the issue nicely. so if
Okay, we
anything
will
else-
now open it up to commissioner comments, and I have a few points of clarification. First of all, I want to thank our staff for this very, very heavy lift that you have gone through, analyzing everything, every which way you possibly could. The community outreach, I think, is a model. And I want the folks out there to know we were able to do the community outreach. It was very costly because we got a grant to do that. And so we asked for your opinions many, many times, and many people responded to that. And so I know there's often complaints, well, you didn't ask us what we think. Well, we can't always do that, but the community can weigh in on meetings like this while you sit at home, and you can watch what's going on. I want to reiterate again, the reason why we're doing this is because of a mandate from the Oregon legislature on House Bill 2021 and Senate Bill 458 and the third bill that you mentioned. Now, this is a mandate for the government to do this. This is not a mandate on the private property owners that you do this. Private property owners still have a choice. Am I clear? This is just a mandate on the government that we do these changes to the ordinances in our zoning. But the private people, you don't have to do it, whatever you want. But if your next door neighbor has applied legally in doing it, you don't get a complaint about it because they are within the law. So know that, sir, or anybody else who wants to try to stop development in your area. It's a state law, and our hands are tied. We are abiding by the law because as sworn elected officials, we take an oath of office to obey the law and the Constitution of the state of Oregon and the United States. That's what that is. Fritzie, would you please call up the map, bring up the map where the yellow, whoever's doing this. Now, the growth rates are going to vary in the county. In some of our probably less developed, and I talked with staff about this, less developed areas, you're probably looking at a 1% growth rate, maybe. However, you're going to find a higher growth rate maybe in unincorporated Happy Valley. And is that map coming, Tony?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to look, the folks look at this map. What you see in yellow is Clackamas County. But I want you to look at the cities. We see Oregon City, Gladstone, West Linn, River Grove, Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, Happy Valley. Those cities are doing the exact same thing that we're doing in yellow because it applies to all jurisdictions. So don't think that Clackamas County is the only one doing infill. We are not the only jurisdiction doing middle housing. So if you think we're going to have all this buildup in unincorporated Clackamas County, the same thing is happening in the cities where I suspect the growth rates could be higher in the cities. Maybe, maybe not, we don't know. So thinking that we're going to be just inundated with increased housing, I don't think so initially, but it is an opportunity for people who want to have a second EDU to take care of our aging population or special needs population, and that is a positive, okay? Secondly, or thirdly, please go to slides, I want to look at the amendments, Tony, slides 10 and 11. Now, we don't have to take action on this, but if we don't take action, we have to accept what the legislature does, but we want to try to add our own flavor to it as much as the law allows. And this board has been very consistent. We want parking. We don't want to have to, go down so many feet and park in front of another neighbor's house and take up their parking. But we can have one parking place. We added that, and that's all we can do, correct, Martha? Okay, we have done that. We have also identified the sidewalks. Parking is on here. So we have done, through our meetings, and the staff has listened to us all year long, we've been talking about land use and what's coming, and they have incorporated all of the Clackamas County values as far as we can go on this. And I do understand some people aren't going to like that, but that's what the law is. Martha talked about the FILO, and Tony, go to slide 11. I'm just removing the minimum lot requirement of 3,000. I think that's a positive. I really do. We have land divisions, we have lot coverage standards, we still have standards, and people still are going to have to go to our planning department and apply for the land use situations. They're going to have to go to our planning department and apply for building permits, and they're going to have to go through all the procedures that everybody else does. So we're not taking away any of the regulations that would normally happen when you want to add housing. And so with that in mind, after Commissioner Communication, we're going to open up the public hearing. And I have one commissioner in the queue, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair. I do agree with your earliest comments with regard to the great work our staff did, so kudos to staff for all the hard work in this. I know it's been difficult, especially when you're facing a mandate and the complexities of land use, so it is truly appreciated. It is a great work, so. And I think if there's any frustration, it's not directed towards our staff, it's really directed towards the situation that we're in. Where I disagree a little bit, though, is that I don't think it's a black and white situation. I don't think it's like people that don't want development versus the people that want to see a lot of housing. I think there's a lot of room in between there, and I think it's more for me about building smart communities or building it right or getting it right. It's making sure that we're actually providing, safe communities or good communities and have all the services. So. And I also agree with Martha, your statement, and that as a result of this, there's probably not going to be a lot of development along this line. He's going to take advantage of this because of the economics currently that are in place. So I agree with all those things. We definitely need housing. This should not, whatever I say here, I want to make sure it's not perceived as being anti-development or being pro-development. It's really about doing it right and the consequences of not getting it right. So maybe this is more of a question for Nate, but getting back to, as Martha was speaking about, asking the service districts if there was areas of concern, I think that in and of itself is not really the same as saying, are there adequate services? And I'm going to give you an example. Stormwater, which is a favorite one for me. When we talk to people about stormwater, they say, whether it's the road department or whether it's ODOT or whether it's Oklahoma Water Services or it's WES or whatever, there's always this thing that it's really not our responsibility. It's really water quality. It's best practices is water quality. So, but that isn't really necessarily the same thing as saying there's adequate stormwater services or provision of stormwater facilities, and there isn't because we have flooding. So it's a different, we're not asking the real question, and I don't even know what the way to really to say to establish, what have we actually done to say that the services are adequate or they're sufficient or they exist? That's different than saying, are there areas of concern? So I just see that from our standpoint, and I agree with the chair, all jurisdictions are facing this, but however, I think cities have done a better job in general, have been a better job of developing with their codes and everything else and making sure that they have a lot of those facilities. The unincorporated areas in the counties have not really been the benefactor of that kind of detailed planning. It's been more hodgepodge, if you will. And it's been with service districts where and areas where there lacks even service districts. So it really hasn't really come together. A lot of old existing development that was not done in current standards. So my question to you is, Mr. Boderman, is that threshold of determining services are adequate or exist, have we really met that?
Well, so if I understand your question correctly, I guess it's, there's a couple different ways that you can go about addressing that particular issue. One is what's provided under the administrative rule and what Martha alluded to, which is this notion that there may be grounds to grant deferral, right, of certain areas because there isn't adequate infrastructure, that the infrastructure would be made inadequate by the addition of additional housing. And that's where Martha summarized the outreach to the service providers in asking whether those, whether there's any areas of concern, right? And the information that we received apparently was that those that responded didn't flag any of those areas, right? And so I guess under the rule, as I understand it, to qualify for that particular exemption would really require a lot of that technical background in the answers that are provided by the service providers. Now, there's a second way, right? And there's a second way to get at the issue that you're discussing, and that is a conflict potentially between the state law and the administrative rule. And I think what you're probably driving at, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is this notion that state law provides that sufficient urban services must be provided. And it's a fairly generic requirement, right? The administrative rule then attempts to define what sufficient urban services mean, and they do that by saying sufficient urban services mean areas that are within an urban service district boundary. So that could be a single urban service district boundary. And so the question under that approach then becomes whether the administrative rule is really implementing what's required under state law. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge, right? That's a fairly straightforward challenge that you would see to an administrative rule under state law is whether the department in this case has exceeded their authority in promulgating that rule, whether it's inconsistent or whether it's above and beyond what the legislature intended. And I think that's what you're really driving at is what did the legislature mean by sufficient urban services? The department has told us they think it means if you're in a single urban service district, that's sufficient. But obviously, folks are going to differ on whether that was the legislative intent, whether the department interpreted that correctly. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does. And I go back to my earlier comment. I think that we're in great conflict with the 19 state plan, not all of them, but some of the 19 state planning goals. And I think we're also in conflict with a number of other goals that have been implemented since that time. So, but being in the boundaries of a district does not constitute that their service exists. I can use parks, I can use transit. Most of Clackamas County has transit's non-existent, but yet on that map that the chair asked to be pulled up with the gray and the yellow, there are substantial areas in there that lack transit. So just being in the boundaries does not constitute the services there. Same goes to stormwater. We have defined in the master plan in the Parks District, for example, clearly stated there's a number of areas that are severely underserved or essentially not served at all, right? But they're in the boundaries. So I'm not here to change anything today. I'm not here I think we need to make these changes within the time frame. I get that. But what I am proposing, whether it's today or another day, is that we actually challenge the state on this. I think it's really incumbent upon us and incumbent on every jurisdiction to make sure our communities are built smart, done smart, and that we're protecting the lives of people, and we're doing it right. This is not about yes or no. It's about how we do it. And I don't think we've met the mark. And this is my case. Transit, stormwater, and parks, I think, are a big issue where, yep, you're in the boundaries. Thank you for your response, by the way, Nate. I don't think we asked the question right to the districts, the providers. If we asked the question differently, I think would have a different response.
Well, I have a lot of faith in our staff. There's the subject matter experts in that they know how to ask a question. I think you're compliant with the law, and that's really all we can do. We can sit here all day long and argue there's not adequate services, and we can make the point positive to that, and I appreciate Commissioner Saffis bringing that up. However, as I said before, this is a mandate. We can continue to do what we can do to provide sewer, rainwater, runoff, whatever you want to do. And we're inching toward that. It's going to be slow, but we're inching toward that. And we do need to pass this by June 30th, and this is not the only meeting we're going to have on this because it's a process. When we have zone changes going forward, it's very public, and we have to do it in certain meetings, certain laws have to be changed, and it is quite a process. I have 2 commissioners in the queue, and I'm not sure who was first. Does it matter?
Doesn't matter.
Commissioner Schrader, would you like to make a comment?
Well, I just want to clarify, and I think you've already done this, Chair, but I just want to repeat that this is not something this county came up with. This is from the legislature, and if we do not adopt something that at least reflects what our communities, we as electeds believe our communities would prefer over just having a one-size-fits-all from the state. That is essentially what we're faced with. And I know that the staff and the Planning Commission have done everything they can under these circumstances to model this over something that could be more livable for our communities. I agree with Commissioner Savas, having been here for a while, and Overland Park always being an issue of an urbanized area that did not have appropriate urban services. That is something that we had to fix later, and it took a lot of time, money, energy, and required an urban renewal district because they were building septic tanks failing all over the place in an urban area, and you guys have been here long enough that you remember that. So yeah, I actually share the concern with the vagueness over, what really does constitute urban services, and if the service districts can adequately do that, I think, of course, they're going to do the best they can and try to do the best they can. But I just don't see any other way right now. Challenging the state, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be a further discussion or not. That will be up to my colleagues and the chair, as far as I'm concerned. So, anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schrader. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Yes, I have some concerns. One is, I think we have a responsibility to look at potential for conflict from neighborhoods on middle housing. Middle housing is a Band-Aid to our housing shortage. When we talk about more affordable, and use the word affordable middle housing, the price of housing is dictated by inventory. Right now, our inventory is extremely small. So for middle housing to have an effect to bring down the cost of housing, you're going to need a lot of inventory in middle housing to do that. Right now, Happy Valley, for example, you want to rent an apartment, $2,000 a month plus utilities. So, for middle housing to actually be affordable, it's going to have to require a lot of inventory built up on it. Another concern is neighborhood and CPO potential for objections and argument on what is specific services that Commissioner Savas just talked about. But here's the big picture. Our good folks up at Portland State University in 2019 did the regional population growth study for greater, Tri-County area. If you go back to 1970, the population of Clackamas County was about 180,000 people. We grew by almost 250,000 in 50 years, and now we're at 430,000. That study that was done in 2019 says that Clackamas County could be looking at a population of 680,000 in 2070. That's the same growth rate as we've had in the previous 50 years. So as we look at middle housing and the Band-Aid that it is for our housing shortage, I don't want us to take our eyes off the need to pressure the state legislature to change Oregon land use laws so that Clackamas County can actually build the housing required to alleviate this shortage we're suffering under. So let's not take I know we have a limited ability to jerk around Salem and what happens down there, but let's not take our eyes off planning for the real future, which is not middle housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Commissioners, you'll get another opportunity to comment, but what I'm going to do now is open the public hearing, public testimony. And I will begin if there's any elected officials in the room or online. I see none in the room. Tony, do we have any online?
Checking, madam.
Thank you.
I do not have anyone registered, ma'am.
Okay. Is there anybody registered online to testify?
I have one hand raised.
Okay. Are there any representatives from a CPO or agencies who wish to testify? If so, you have 3 minutes each. I see none of those representatives in the room. Tony, do you have anybody online?
I have two hands raised at this point. I'm not certain as to their status.
Okay, we'll get to them at the end. Now, I will go to the people in the room who would wish to testify. I have one blue card. Palmer Kellum, would you please come forward, state your name, your area of residence, and sir, you have 3 minutes. Tony, we have a card over here. Go ahead, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Palmer Kellum. I've lived in Clackamas County my whole life, the last 37 years, in a house with my wife in the Jennings Lodge, Oak Grove area. I'm the guy that was at the Planning Commission meeting that said, no. That one vote that was up there, I'll confess, that's me. I have some specific concerns about this, and it starts back at the inception of the law. I went back to the beginning when this public information became available. Where did this come from? Let's be frank. Tina Kotek, Kate Brown, the cesspool north of us is called the city of Portland. They completely botched their housing. They're also, if we want to find fault, Mark Schull gets it, the urban growth boundary, which I support land use planning, but the urban growth boundary got choked. They did not keep up with the growth. The supply was down, the demand was high, and the prices were through the roof. So let's just go to the state legislature and let's just come up with a Band-Aid and let's just force all these people in the whole state of Oregon now. The scope has gone from city of Portland. Now it's the state legislature. Let's just force everybody in the state of Oregon to come up with this Band-Aid. It's bad legislation. It's not particularly cost effective. It's purely an infill bill. And yes, Madam Chairman, I get the fact that it's the law and that there are, so this becomes to me kind of a legal issue and not necessarily a planning issue. I think the staff has done a wonderful job with what the state is shoving down your throats. It's come up with your own plan or where you're going to do ours come June 30th of this year. I think they worked hard. I think they did a wonderful job. But my question is, do we have to do this at all? Okay? Particularly in the area that I live in, which is that yellow area we've been talking about, Jennings Lodge, Oak Grove. We don't have sufficient urban services in some areas. Commissioner Savas did a wonderful job itemizing those. I think stormwater is a problem. I don't think we're in compliance with a federal regulation, ZD, or I think it's in my written points I put forth. There's a federal regulation about stormwater. I think we're inadequate there. I don't agree with the interpretation that the staff has come up with as far as ORS 195-065, which is where it itemizes what urban services we should have. I talked to a gentleman from the state of Oregon, And,
Finish up, sir.
is that my
Just-
timer?
Yes, but just conclude. Go ahead.
I'll be quick. He basically said, and it's in my email that I sent to Martha, well, if you're within the boundary, then you have the urban services. I don't buy that. The water doesn't flow when it rains in my neighborhood, okay? It just doesn't happen. The pond at Springfield Park either floods or it's dry, and we don't do a very good job with the runoff there.
Thank you.
We just have some issues here. So what am I asking the commission? I'm asking the commission, I think you need to challenge the interpretation of what services are, but that is only going to help just our little area of the county. I think the real question is this law really something that we have to abide by? Has there been a sufficient?
Thank you, Mr. Kellum. You've asked that question 3 times now. Would
Okay.
you please conclude?
Okay, conclude. Challenge the law for the whole county. Challenge the provisions of this as far as the unincorporated area for the sufficient urban services.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate all that you do. And I know that it's not your fault.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure, because I thought maybe you were blaming me for this. I'm just stating the
No,
law.
no.
Okay?
I know where it came from. I know where it came
And I
from.
don't disagree with anything you've said today.
Thank you.
Yes, we hear you, we get it, we live in these communities. You know, we're not some people sitting at the dais looking down on you, we're in the middle of this. And some of the objections raised today by my commissioners on either side of me are valid. Yes, we do have to do this by June 30th. However, and maybe my commissioners already know this, there is a provision that we can go back and revisit some other issues that do not have to relate to land use. This is a land use hearing, okay? We can go back and look at findings, and if my commissioners want to know who that is, talk to Martha or Jennifer, our experts in the room. So, and I don't know if what you're saying can be looked at, but we do need to comply by this, because if we don't, the state's going to come in and dictate to you, sir, your land use rights. And we're trying to do the best we possibly can to protect your rights and your livability quotient when they're stabbing us. So thank you for coming up. Next up, Punky Scott, please come forward, state your name, area of residence, and ma'am, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Punky Scott, also known as Ardeen Lacey Scott. I have a home property on River Drive, which is in the Jennings Lodge area, and I have commercial property where the bomber has been located all these years, formerly where the home of the bomber was. My question is, in the yellow zone, does that affect commercial property as well?
Fritzy, can you answer that?
No, those yellow areas are urban, low-density residential zones. And so the allowance would only be in those, for
Just
those areas.
residential zones.
Yes. Where your commercial property is located is not in one of those zones.
Okay, because apparently I'm up for selling
Tony,
my,
just a minute, bring up the slide on where all the zones are listed, and we'll refer to that. Would you please continue?
my question was, I have commercial property that I have for sale, and I've had individuals who are interested, but the parking is of concern to them. If I was within 1 block of the light rail station, they only need 1 parking space per housing located there, and they're not talking quadruplexes, they're talking multi-story,
buildings.
apartment. But if I'm not within that 1 block, and therefore they need to have 2 parking spaces. Well, they don't make any money on parking spaces, so they're looking at it with a very jaundiced eye, and I didn't know if that was Metro that had come up with that plan or
So
what.
if I could interject.
Sure.
This piece, the actions we're taking today, I don't believe is applicable to your situation. I'm going to go on a limb and say that. This is just residential. I understand you want to change the zoning from commercial to residential in your area. And in your case, you have a special case that I think this board is going to look at later.
Okay. Well,
So
that's
that
all-
does not
that's
apply
my
to
only
this.
question. I just wanted to know
This,
what,
Yes, that's correct.
okay, thank you.
All
I
right,
got something
thank you.
right today. Hee-haw.
and only 2 minutes.
Good
You
job.
know, you're good. That makes up for Mr. Kellen. Right? That's okay. No, we like your opinions, Mr. Kellen, because I do think you speak for a lot of people out there, and I do appreciate that very much, yes. Anybody else online? Tony, I see you have a light on.
Madam Chair, I have Mr. Bornfield from NCPRD.
Okay, so he is, I don't know. Mr. Bornfield, have at it, please.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. I am actually speaking as an individual. I, yes, am on the NCPRD and other boards and formerly on the CPO board. But what I want to speak to, as I have before, is that I actually support House Bill 2001. What I don't support, and I want to go on record again, is that I object to this failure by the revised, what do they call them? The definitions, the Oregon, the rules, where they can take something that in plain English says that if you lack sufficient urban services, as been discussed already by several folks ahead of me here, then it does not apply. And yet in the rules, they came up with a workaround that violates directly what the state legislature passed. They did not pass those rules. They passed that it would not apply if you lack sufficient urban services. What will happen, and this is the reason I am concerned, it will exacerbate the urban services that we currently lack. Case in point, parks. I'm putting my time and energy into supporting the process, and I really want to thank you all for that support you've given us to broaden the involvement of people throughout the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. So as a volunteer, we're out there reaching out to bring it before y'all when we have our candidates selected to be added to the district advisory committee representing those far-flung areas, so their voices will be heard. And they do, and have from more than 30 years ago when the district was formed, lack sufficient urban services by any definition. So by building more without addressing that, it becomes an unfunded mandate, and it is not what the law says, it's the rules to do the work rather, and that's what I'm objecting to. So the last thing I want to speak to is, this is about quality of life. And this is like it was said earlier, the mass transit, we're not getting any help on mass transit. McLaughlin is a slowed down mess every day going one way or the other. We don't have more open space. We're not acquiring it sufficiently. And we need to get the voices of the far or flung parts of the district, which is the vast majority of unincorporated, makes up 83% of NCPRD. And yet we lack sufficiently in parks. The vast majority, over half of the parks in NCPRD exist within a city. And the city that left took the other more than. So the point of it is, thank you for your support. And I'm looking for ways that we can, within the structure we have, still succeed at providing or helping, not just to exacerbate, but to address the issue of lacking sufficient urban services. So that's what I wanted to say. I appreciate that. Appreciate your efforts. I understand the press, but this workaround is not straightforward and it is not what the law says. So thank you.
Thank you. Does staff wish to comment on the last caller's?
No, I mean, I think that's another example of the issue that we covered with Commissioner Savas here.
I do too. No, I served in the legislature for a long time, and I dealt with rules like this. And so as a legislator, you pass an Oregon revised statute, and all laws go to rulemaking. And every legislator is invited to attend the rulemaking authority, and I have attended those meetings. And any legislator could go and say, oh, well, this was the intent, this was a floor speech, this is what we meant, and gee, maybe the language didn't get into the bill. I will say this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, Oregon administrative rules have the force and effect of the Oregon revised statutes. And if you want to challenge that, that's fine, but that's going to be their scapegoat. the administrative rules have the force and effect of the laws from the legislature. And by the way, the bills that I passed, they got changed sometimes that I didn't like it either. But, you know, get a new legislature if you don't like it. But don't come to us and say, oh, that's not right, that's not right, okay? So in a way, I'm putting it back on the folks listening and to you out there. If you don't like what's going on, you know, show up and try to do something about that. Thank you very much. Tony, is there anybody else online that wishes to testify?
Madam Chair, I have 2 more registered. I will start with Joseph Edge. Sir, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and area of residence.
Hello, my name is Joseph Edge. I am the chair of the Oak Grove Community Council Community Planning Organization. I'm also a resident of Oak Grove. I'm here to make a comment on behalf of the Oak Grove Community Council. However, I will respond to questions about my own personal opinions, which are very well formed on this subject matter. My request from the Oak Grove Community Council is that you, with all due respect, please leave the public record open for additional written comments to give the Oak Grove Community Council, which is meeting tonight, the opportunity, one more opportunity to approve comments from the Community Council or from the CPO members for your consideration during deliberations. And that is my one request, because we have not yet approved any comments on behalf of the CPO, and so I simply am here to ask you for just a little bit more time for us to do so, and then have you continue the hearing for deliberations. You know, just give us one more week, I suppose, to get the meeting in tonight, perhaps approve some comments, and then give me the opportunity to draft those comments and submit them to you for your review. Thank you.
Okay, how many months and how much outreach have we done to the CPOs and to all the groups out there that there was ample opportunity for them to submit their testimony and be heard on this?
Well, we have been reaching out to the communities and presenting at CPOs for well over a year. I can say that the particulars about the draft code amendments were originally sent out and posted in February of this year. And we have made some small tweaks to them, but the bulk of that has been available since then for people to look at and comment on.
So in the interest of time, and this commission has a very, very heavy schedule up until the end of this fiscal year, if this gentleman wants to submit testimony and his opinion on that, go ahead. However, I am not going to leave the public hearing open. We need to finish the business and move on. I'm not sure what his objections are. I wish he would have stated them today. He had 5 minutes to do so as being an elected CPO leader. I do value opinion. However, we have done outreach and outreach, and so if I allow this one test, and it can be admitted to the record, but I'm not going to leave the public testimony. I'm not going to hold the hearing off. If he wants to send all the commissioners an email, go right ahead. But we're going to move ahead with this today, Nate.
And that's fine. So if you intend to make a decision today, what will happen is you would close the record, you'd make a decision, and then we would come back at a later time for you to adopt the order, but there is no public testimony associated with that.
Okay, why don't Mr. Edge send an email to staff, to the commissioners, to legal counsel, and I suspect if you have objections to this, they are the same objections that we've been hearing all along. Okay,
That's
who's
not
up
correct.
next?
Madam Chair, I have one more. Susie McHarness. Ma'am, please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Susie McHarness. I live on Clatsop Street in North Clackamas, unincorporated. I've been walking my precinct here. I'm a precinct committee person for 18 years. I've lived at this residence for 30. My concern, and reason why I'm here, and I may be jumping too soon, I'm not sure, but I don't want to wait until it's too late. I need to bring up the problem of public safety. I need to walk. I've been diagnosed with osteoporosis. I'm a walker, but there's not one single road I can walk on with safety in this neighborhood. There's one place on 72nd as it goes a 90-degree corner. It goes from 72nd to Alberta, there, and it's a 90-degree corner, and at that corner where they built all these new homes where the old Veterans Hall used to be, there's 12 inches between the edge of the property line where they've stacked rocks and the pavement. It's severely dangerous. It's unwalkable. I'm so mad because there's no through streets that go through, so it affects a huge chunk of blocks that you can now not get around. I can't go down the hill. There's 4 people in electric wheelchairs that use the street. All of us are actually literally walking in the street. We're getting honked at, yelled at, but there's nowhere to walk. The edges of the road are completely pitted out. For 30 years, they haven't even put 1 ounce of gravel. My concern is how are we gonna, with more cars all slapped all over the street, no sidewalks, public safety. It's very, very important that we not get pinched off at all these corners so we can no longer walk around anywhere. Very, very concerned. And, you know, I'm really scared because I also have a bullet that went through my house that's lodged in my bedroom door. The drivers, they're drive-by shootings, and they're dangerous. These people couldn't care less who's in their way, and they don't care what you're doing on the street. If you're in your way, it's all about the driver. Where do we walk when they start plastering cars all over these gravel edges of the road? Mud holes, thick mud. Some of these corners, there's 2 feet between the edge of the pavement and the bottom of the holes. They're gigantuous. We need to consider this before we start slapping the houses up. Why are they not providing adequate frontage for people just to walk? I know that this 72nd, though when there's no sidewalks, I can guarantee you 3 to 4 cars per houses, there is no edge of the road. We're already pinched off. Everywhere I turn, we're pinched off. Please, will somebody bring this attention to the builders and ward this off before it's too late? We already have a very serious safety issue with walking the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Susie, are you still online? You bring up some very important concerns. You say you live on 72nd at Clackamas. I'm trying just to narrow it down without giving your address. Are you on 72nd?
I'm on Clackamas Street at the 4-way. I feel like I live at the motocross gun range.
Okay, that's fine. I'm trying, please work with me here. You live on Clackamas. The closest cross street is 72nd, is that right?
It's Flayville Drive. But 72nd is in my neighborhood. It's what I've been walking around there for 30 years. It's
okay, thank you. Susie, I understand this. I'm trying to narrow down where the problem area is. I would like staff to go out, take a drive, and try to identify possible danger spots, like you say, because I'm trying to help you here. I'm not trying to be.
Thank you so much. The whole entire street of Clackamas is a mud hole.
Okay.
72nd there's places where it actually dips down. There's actually huge ditches.
Okay.
This whole upper flat here between Flayville Drive and 72nd and between Clackamas and Alberta. And Alberta technically isn't even a legal street. It's house frontage, and they cut through their speeders. It's just horrible. And I have 4 people in my precinct that are in electric wheelchairs. We are literally being it's really bad. And
Okay.
is a
Thank you very much. There's a commissioner that would like to address this, Susie. Just a moment, please. We understand your concern here. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, it sounds like this particular person has a kind of a severe issue with the roads nearby. But what I do want to say is that what she's really describing essentially is very typical for the unincorporated areas that we're talking about here that are in yellow. It's very typical where there's no sidewalks and so forth. So people are forced to walk in the street. If they're handicapped, or they have a disability, they're going to be forced to use whatever assistance or device they have to be in the street. That's been something I've been trying to raise on this parking issue for quite a long time. It is simply not safe. It is a quality of life issue. Again, there are varying amounts of that lack of, whether it's, call it services. But the one thing I did want to ask a question when she did mention the law, or not feeling safe, and I took that from the shooting, so I took that to law enforcement. Is law enforcement considered one of the urban services?
No fire protection, but no law enforcement.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Thank you, especially after we heard from our sheriffs yesterday, our sheriff and our district attorney yesterday, and a great discussion we had yesterday, actually.
It was. Thank you for clarifying that. Paul, I just think maybe staff needs to go out and look at what's going on in there, and maybe we can, I don't know, I can't promise anything on that, but thank you. Tony, is there anybody else online to testify?
Madam Chair, I do not have any other hands raised at this point.
Okay, I just got a text message that I have to read to you folks from our department head, Dan Johnson. We will have TM go out and take a look. We have limitations on what we can maintain, but we can go look. Won't be able to build sidewalks, but if it's a maintenance issue and we can maintain the road that we can access, he's talking about transportation maintenance, we'll do that. He's listening, so a lot of people listening to your concerns, and that department will do what they can. And I can't make promises, but because there's limited pots of money everywhere. Thank you, Tony. I will now close the public testimony portion of this hearing. Does any commissioner wish to comment on the proposal? Any further comment, Commissioner Savas, and then after his commissioner comments, I will entertain a motion. Go ahead, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, Chair, I would actually suggest one thing that wasn't mentioned in response to Mr. Edge when he had called, and that is that the Planning Commission completed their work on March 28th. So that hasn't even really been 30 days. So if you look at that and look at their recommendation, 30 days has not even transpired. So I would just duly ask that we reconsider leaving the record open for whatever period of time, a week or two, to allow that time to happen and complete our work at the next hearing.
I'm going to not recommend we do that. We need to move this along. Like I said, I don't think any comment that comes in can change anything that we can do today. If I thought Mr. Edge's testimony could change our course of action, I would leave the testimony open. We need to complete our business and go forward. Nate, do you have a comment?
No, I'm just thinking to myself over here timing, because we do have the June 30
We do have
deadline.
and we have at least 2 other meetings where we have to, how many other meetings?
So we would at least have one more with the business meeting to adopt whatever the decision is. And so we would need a week or 2 lead time for that. We do have a motion on the last page to continue. If anybody does choose to make a motion, that's how you would go about doing that. It would be to continue the hearing. And that would be a continuation until May 11th, which I think is the next time. However, I defer to Tony because I know we're in budget season, and so.
Tony, do you have a comment?
Madam Chair, there is a policy session scheduled for May 11th related to House Bill 2001.
Okay. And is that necessary, Tony, if we pass it as proposed today?
My understanding is no.
The policy session would happen. It's separate but related issue. But yes, that.
When we discussed this earlier today, this particular situation is very, very complicated in what the legislature told us to do. So we're not going through the normal processes of public hearings, and then this happens, and, right? Martha?
So this is the normal process of public hearings for a legislative text amendment. And so you are not required, the board is not required to have more than one hearing. You must have at least one. So you could make a decision today and then direct staff to draft the findings and the ordinance, and we bring that back to you at a business meeting. Or you could continue the hearing today for whatever reason and leave the record open, and then we had May 11th set aside for that.
If we needed it.
If we needed it.
Okay.
The policy session is a different issue. It relates to our findings, but that is
That's
not
a totally
related to this
different-
land use hearing.
Totally different. As I said before, we can adopt certain findings after June 30th that relating to other issues, but this part needs to be done. That's the briefing I had this morning.
And the findings need to be done by June 30th.
There are different findings, Martha, is what I'm talking about. Jennifer Hughes, just a moment. Findings.
I thought I was going to make it through the hearing just in the audience, but
Please introduce yourself.
I don't mind. I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm the planning director. So we had a conversation earlier, Chair Smith and County Council and I, about just process for today. So I think what the issue is there's this financial incentives piece that House Bill 2001 requires the board to consider. That's what we're tentatively going to talk about on May 11th, but that depends on whether you decide to continue this hearing and how much time the continuation would take. But you're right, you and I talked about the possibility if the board was interested in financial incentives, that doesn't have to happen by June 30th. So separately, you could consider that. And of course, you always have the ability to go back and amend the code later related to housing at any point in the future. But this issue of the middle housing, the model code will take effect on July 1st if we don't adopt something. So
Okay.
that's time sensitive.
Okay. Commissioner Fisher, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I am interested in hearing more specifically what members of our CPOs have to say if they want more time to give additional feedback. We have our community planning organizations to review land use decisions and to advise us. So I would propose that we do continue, and I'll go ahead and make a motion. We'll see if we get a second. We see where it goes, but in the interest of time, I will move that we continue this matter until May 11th, 2022 at 10 a.m. for deliberation and decision only.
Second.
A motion has been made to continue the hearing to May 11th by Commissioner Fisher. It has been seconded by Commissioner Savas. Any further comments from commissioners? Commissioner Scholl.
Yeah, I have a question. If we continue this on May 11th, will you be able to get your work done before 30 June?
We should have enough time.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, that's fine. Any other further comments on this? Tony, please take the poll.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
As a courtesy to our CPO, aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 5-0. But I do want to caution anybody, we appreciate your public opinion. I don't see how we can change anything more than what we've done today. It will give you a chance to opine and complain, and that is fine, totally fine. We're going to allow for that. But I just caution you, if you intend for additional results, I don't know what they would be. Okay, thank you very much. Nate?
So we should clarify, so the reason that the hearing is being continued is to allow additional testimony.
Correct.
And so the motion was technically for a continued hearing until May 11th for deliberation and decision only. So at that hearing on May 11th, there'll be no in-person public testimony, but you will be receiving written testimony up until that date. And so I want to clarify for those listening and those that intend to submit additional testimony what the parameters of submitting
We're just
that will
leaving it
be.
open.
So we're leaving it open until,
So what's the cutoff date for testimony? The hearing is May 11th, but when do they need to get testimony in?
I think that's entirely up to you. If you want to have a chance to review it, you could just leave the written record open for a week, like till close of business
Is
a
May
week from today.
11th a Wednesday?
It is. It's 2 weeks from today.
Cutoff date on testimony is the Monday prior.
Okay.
Because I want staff to be able to have a chance to read it and analyze it and my commissioners as well, to understand what's going on. And I think that's quite generous.
So do you want to set a time, like 4 o'clock is sort
Yeah,
of
4
what we usually
o'clock
do?
on 11, on May 9th. It'd be May 9th, correct?
Yes. Okay.
That's a Monday. Okay. Commissioner Savas, you have your light on.
Yeah, Chair, I think it'd be a great idea, especially coming out of a meeting last night about a school nearby in this same area we're talking about in yellow, and the changes being made, which probably put more children on the street than perhaps before. I think it'd be a great idea, actually, if, and I'm happy to put a short route together, maybe if all of us actually went for a walk through this community, and you can see what's not there.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll go.
And that's fine. I have walked this community much.
Yeah, and the reason I say this is, I know we've been through a lot. We've been through forest fires, we've been through the ice storm, we've been through this COVID thing, the mandates from the state. We fought a lot, we spoke, we sent letters to the governor, we did what we could. Our citizens expected that. We've dealt with the tolling issue. We're dealing with this. We're dealing with the law enforcement changes going on in the state legislature when it comes to more clemency, expungements, number of things that are affecting the quality of life. I think it's time for us to kind of, not rush into something. And I'm going to, not here today, but I really want to plant the seed about there is a time not to just sit back and just get rolled over. It is time to, there's a number of issues I think we need to stand up. And I don't think that we're going to change this overnight. We're not going to change HB 2001 overnight, but there's some tweaks, I think, that we could argue that are valid to make sure that we're forming our communities in a safe way that meet the goals and requirements of HB 2001 and the spirit of it. And I just argue that we could do that. We just don't need to roll over every time.
Well, Commissioner Savas, I take exception of your comment that we're rolling over. We're abiding by the laws that were passed in 2019, and we're finally doing it in 2022 because of various reasons, and our expiration date is upon us. I don't think we're rolling over. I think you're raising false expectations to the community by offering more testimony, thinking that we're going to change something, and I take great exception to that. Yes, I have walked these neighborhoods. I know what they look like. Let's talk about disparate areas in Clackamas County for a minute. We had a forest fire that burned hundreds of thousands of acres. And I asked for my commissioners to take a walk and look at that out there. Myself and only 2 other commissioners showed up, my 2 commissioners on my right, to look at hundreds of thousands of decimated areas and homes. So what comes around, I guess, it's fine if the commissioners want to do that. But this area is not the only area that's suffering in Clackamas County. And we try to do the best that we can. And I just want to caution people, yes, we can go out and walk the communities. Yes, I have worked, I tell you, I've had calls from constituents, Tootie, will you come out and look at this? And I have done it. I've looked at water drainage. I've looked at sidewalks. I've looked at holes in the pavement, and I have contacted staff to try to do something about it. And if anybody wants to go out there, I think that's fine. But Commissioner Savas, I know you want to challenge this, and legal counsel is going to have to look at the urban services going forward. But if we decide to sue the state legislature, which I think is our only opportunity here, that's going to be a very heavy lift. Okay, all my commissioners' lights have perked up. Wow. I don't know who's first, but Commissioner Scholl, we're going to go on down the line.
I understand Commissioner Savas's concern and frustration about being a county commissioner and having to react to measures, laws that come out of Salem and make life difficult for us. I also want to remind folks that are listening today of what Chair Smith said earlier. People need to make sure that their state representative is going to work to pass laws in Salem that are going to be conducive to making for a better life in Clackamas County. So that's very important, and that's why here in 3 weeks it's primary, and I hope that every single voter in Clackamas County votes and takes charge of what happens in their representative district. Thank you.
Commissioner Fisher, we're just going to go on down the line.
Yeah, so I'm always happy to go on walks or drives with Commissioner Savas. We did that when I call myself a baby commissioner, drove all around the area, looked at the mobile home parks, looked at different things, and it's useful, it's very helpful. So I am all for it. I would like to request that we do it in the morning, early before one of our Wednesday or Thursdays, if that's possible. But Commissioner Savas, I'm all in, and I do think, piggybacking on what Commissioner Scholl said, that it's really important for us to have a deep understanding of how what Salem does affects us in Clackamas County, because we have many opportunities to talk to our legislators, let them know how their decisions affect our residents, and without us really understanding, okay, I'll tell a little story. I saw Senator Packwood at an event, and he told me that I had the worst job in the world. And I said to him, Senator, when you were serving the people of Oregon, you could not have done your job without people in my position informing you and telling you what to do. And he said, that's absolutely right. And with a smile, we continued a pleasant conversation. But our legislators need us, and they need us to be informed and understand really how what they do affects us. So we can't change this right now. We're going to have to do something by June 30th, and we better do what's going to be better for us in Clackamas County than that model code. But we do need to understand how it will affect our residents.
And I think we do, and I think that's just fine. Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yep, I would be glad to go on a walk in these areas. As you know, I think I'm the longest serving commissioner in the Association of Oregon Counties at this point. I also think here, but so I've been everywhere, but I don't mind going again. But my comment is, for a challenge, my suggestion would be that perhaps Commissioner Savas, this is something you should bring up at the Association of Oregon Counties. I think you're on transportation and development, aren't you? Yeah. Because I would suspect, much like the information we've just gotten from the forest folks today with Lynn County, I know we've probably read our emails to see what's going on with that challenge. It's usually better, there's strength in numbers, and I would suspect we are not the only county that really is feeling challenged by what it really does mean to provide urban services and water and sewer, not just roads. I worry more about water and sewer, quite honestly. So that would be my suggestion, that I don't think it has to be us alone. I think if you'd want to approach that, I think you'd probably find a lot of colleagues who would be interested in that.
I think AOC is a great route for that. And I, just to piggyback on what you say, on a survey that I peeled out from AOC, hopefully all the commissioners did it. My biggest, because they're changing, they're trying to move forward, they're trying to be more, I says the biggest binder of all 36 counties coming together is to oppose the mandates out of Salem, the unfunded mandates, the mandates that have unintended consequences. I think all 36 counties can coalesce around that. Whether that happens or not, that's a heavy lift too. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, Chair, just a friendly comment, that is that, all 5 of the county commissioners were out in the, shortly after the fires. The ground was still smoldering. Fires were still in the distance. So we've been out there. As a matter of fact, I'm still out there talking with residents just out of Springwater Road here a few weeks ago, looking at a gentleman's property where it's severely burned and came very close to his home. The other side of 211, another property I looked at here recently. So I think we're all out there and listening and watching. So sorry I couldn't make your particular invite. But what I did want to say, getting back to the subject matter here today, and that is that the legislative intent, I think, is what can be challenged here. And I think the legislative intent of urban services. Granted, the rulemaking took place, so on and so forth, but I don't understand. I don't think that they probably understood or was able to actually see or live and understand every aspect of every county. No, don't expect them to. But unless we bring to their attention that there's an error or an oversight and there's lives, children's lives, safety issues, other things at stake here, unless they know it and we make it aware of it, they don't know it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Savas. Seeing no further comments before this commission today, we are adjourned.